What's up, guys? As requested, we got the A56 versus the Moto G Stylus 2025. So these are two, kind of mid-range phones, very popular. Which phone should you go for? So I think it's going to be a pretty good comparison here. So first off, with the actual design here, now there is a difference. You do have pretty much a premium build on the A56 here. It's a full glass and metal device here, but the interesting thing about the G Stylus is that even though it's an all plastic phone, it does have still a nice feel to it. It doesn't really feel cheap because of this kind of like leather textured back here. So it's something that I actually really like. But yeah, the metal feels a lot more premium on the A56 for sure. I think the design on both look pretty good. It just comes down to your personal preference. But when we, dive deeper into the hardware here, the Moto G Stylus is actually very good. It actually has IP68 dust and water resistant versus the IP67 dust and water resistant on the A56. And then it also has SD card support. It has a headphone jack, and then it also has a built-in stylus here as well, which works, pretty well. So it's something that, I like to mess around with from time to time. But this phone is packed with, a lot of features as far as the hardware goes. The A56 does not have an SD card support, no headphone jack, and of course no stylus. So, that's a huge benefit for the Moto G Stylus hardware wise. Now, it just really comes down to if you're going to use any of those, things, but it is nice to have in a phone in 2025. As far as the displays go, you have pretty good displays on both of these. The Moto G Stylus is a 6.7-inch AMOLED display. It's 120 Hz and it is 3000 nits peak brightness. It is a 1220 by 2712 resolution at 444 for the PPI with Gorilla Glass 3. You also do have about an 89.3% screen to body ratio. So, both of these phones, the bezels aren't crazy thin, but the bezels are definitely thinner on the Moto G Stylus for sure. And the A56 has pretty much the same size display. It's a 6.7-inch Super AMOLED display. It's 120 Hz HDR10 plus. This one not as bright. It's 1900 nits peak brightness. It is a slightly lower resolution at 1080p, 385 for the PPI, and this does have the Victus Plus glass on here. One thing I know looking at both displays, the Moto G Stylus is a lot more vivid than the A56 here. Even if you turn the vividness slider up on the A56, it still has that kind of more, almost like the older Samsung look on the G Stylus. So it's pretty interesting. Samsung has kind of moved away from that. But I think the displays look great on both. Like I said, you will notice that the G Stylus gets a little bit brighter in direct sunlight. But besides that, I think both displays are pretty nice. So I don't really have an issue. I don't think most people wouldn't really be able to tell the difference for the most part. When it comes to the overall specs and software, the A56 does have an advantage here. Both of these are running Android 15. The A56 actually gets a 6-year Major OS pledge, as opposed to the Moto G Stylus. You only get 2 years of Major OS pledge. And yeah, you can see the Geekbench scores. The A56 is a little bit better here, especially in the multi-core score. And then if we actually pull up our 3D Mark scores, see how they compare to each other with Wildlife Extreme. So yeah, a little bit better in performance with the A56 getting 6 to 10 frames versus the 4 to 6 frames. I would say this about the overall performance. Both phones are pretty good for just daily use and just just doing normal stuff. Like I said, you do have that advantage with the A56 here. The A56 does have the Exynos 1580, 128 gigs. This version is 8 gigs of RAM. There is a 6 gig of RAM base model, I think. And then with the G Stylus, you do have the Snapdragon 6 Gen 3, and you have 128 gigs and 8 gigs of RAM on the base model as well. I would say that animations and just overall, just doing regular stuff on your phone feel pretty smooth on both. I think I like the One UI 7 animations a little bit more, but they're pretty good as far as like, you're scrolling, swiping, just doing normal stuff on your device. Yeah, I just don't see like a massive difference in terms of speed. And then also, since they're kind of like mid-range phones, the gaming experience is kind of roughly the same as well too. But like just coming in here, you know, you playing your normal games like Subway Surfer and stuff like that. You know, it feels pretty similar for the most part. So I would say speed is not a big deciding factor between these two, you know, phones here. Okay, you guys can see they're kind of, you know, more on par with each other in terms of speed. Okay, let's go ahead and open up PUBG here. And as always, guys, be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the latest videos. Be sure to hit the like and the bell so you can be notified. Let's see which one gets in here first. Looks like the Stylus got in here first. Okay, so like I said, PUBG feels pretty similar on both of these phones here. We can play at Smooth Extreme, and they run pretty well. So if you are trying to get a match of PUBG, Call of Duty Mobile, or whatever, they can play emulators, pretty decently as well too. And they, like I said, they feel, pretty similar in terms of speed here. You can see the Stylus is also able to play at Smooth Extreme, 60 frames. Yeah, so they feel pretty similar, guys. So I would say as far as the speed and power difference, it's really not that big of a difference. Also, one thing that I would like to mention is, the software difference, One UI versus the Motorola Skin here. Basically, you do have some cool things in One UI, like intelligent features, but it just doesn't have all the AI features, of course. So object erasers here, best face and stuff like that. You really don't have a lot of AI features on the Stylus. One thing that they do have that is pretty cool is the actual Samsung, oh, not Samsung, but you have a Smart Connect on here. So it's like Samsung desktop support, which that, the A56 doesn't have. So it's pretty cool. It has kind of like a little beam thing, so you could beam it to, another device or, whatever. But yeah, you do have more, kind of AI features on the A56 for sure. They both have the, updated Gemini, and they both have the circle to search as well too. All right, so we got the speakers at max volume. Let's go ahead and see. Yeah, I think even though both speakers are not like crazy good when it comes to the overall quality, I think the A56 is definitely the more balanced speaker here. You can hear the actual 808s. You almost can't really hear the 808s at all on the Stylus. The Stylus is pretty loud though. Yeah, I think the A56 just has the overall better sound when it comes to the speakers. So I would definitely give it to the A56 there. They both have the optical fingerprint scanner, which actually works pretty well. So, they are, of course, going to be a little bit slower, but I don't think it's going to be noticeable. They're a little bit slower than ultrasonic for sure. But I think they've got this down to a point where, I think the only slow one that I've tried this year was like the A56. It was noticeably like slower. But these are perfectly fine. So the cameras are probably going to be a pretty big deciding factor here. So the A56 has a 50 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It has a 5 megapixel macro camera. So you can only get up to around 10 times, digital zoom. There's no telephoto lens, of course. 4K 30 video, 12 megapixel selfie, also 4K 30. The G Stylus is pretty much in that same boat here. It has a 50 megapixel standard, 13 megapixel ultra wide here, and there is no dedicated macro lens. You do have 4K 30 and a 32 megapixel selfie that also shoots in 4K 30. Check out these side-by-side stills and video. Let me know what you guys think. After using both phones for, a pretty reasonable amount of time here, the battery life is awesome on both of these phones actually. They both have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. The G Stylus does charge a bit faster at 68 watts compared to the 45 watts on the A56. You also have an advantage with the G Stylus. It has wireless charging versus no wireless charging on the A56, which is really nice. So overall, my opinion, yeah, it kind of comes down to what you think about the cameras, what you think about the software. But the G Stylus does have a pretty big advantage when it comes to hardware, having IP68, having a pen, having a headphone jack, having SD card support. If you're somebody looking for those things, the obvious choice is going to be the G Stylus. But I would say if you don't care about pen, SD card support, and the headphone jack, I would say the A56, it would be the phone that I would get, because I just like One UI a little bit more. You get longer software updates as well too. And yeah, that's pretty much it. They're pretty much, they're very similar in terms of power as well. So it's not like one has a massive advantage when it comes to specs. The screens are kind of similar as well. So I think it comes down to those kind of main things here if you're trying to make a decision.